Justin, Lesser Dog Tutorials, and this is the second video in the Elden Ring Souls-like tutorial series in Unreal Engine 5. And in this one, I think I said in the last video we're going to get into kind of finishing out the player's animations and actions and whatever, but I don't think we're going to be doing that in this one. This is going to be more boring than that. We're actually going to just be setting up the ability system, and once we have this kind of stuff set up, we can actually really get into the abilities being used and the player being able to do things like attack or jump or roll or whatever. So let's just dive into it. We're going to do some C++. Don't be too scared. We're not really going to get too deep into C++. And then once we actually get the ability system working, we kind of don't have to touch it again for probably the entire time. We may come back to it, but for the most part, it'll be hands-off. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So if we go to Edit and Plugins, we can search for Gameplay Abilities, and you'll see the plugins right here. So go ahead and check that, and we'll restart. So before we create any C++ classes, let's go to Edit, Editor Preferences, and search for Source Code Editor. And you'll see the drop down for which IDE you want to use for your C++ coding. As you can see, I have Visual Studio 2022 selected. I downloaded that. Do not use 2022. This is Justin from the future. I had an error after building this project. I don't know how the error can be fixed, so do not use 2022. Please use 2019. Remove 2022 from your system, unless, of course, they fixed it or whatever. If that's the case, use it. But this is a warning. 2019 is what you'll need as of the time of making this video. So now that the ability system is active, you still can't use it. So what we need to do is head over to the C++ classes, go into your game folder, and you'll find the character class and the game mode class for your project. Right in this folder, we want to right-click, add a new C++ class, head to All Classes, and then search for Attribute Set. And you'll see that right here. Underneath, there's Ability System Test Attribute Set. We don't want that. We want the just plain attribute set. Hit Next, and we'll call this Rune Attribute Set. So with that done, you don't have to do anything else, just hit Create Class. It should open up Visual Studio, and then you might see this live coding thing here. Well, just close that, hit Reload All, and all we're going to be doing is letting these loading bars run their course, and then we're just going to close Visual Studio and go back to Unreal. So back in Unreal, we're actually just going to close out Unreal, and then we want to open the .sln file for the project, because if we're going to be working in C++, we want to start with the Visual Studio solution so that we can run the game from there, and if there's any crash, it will return back to Visual Studio. So when you open Visual Studio, it should look like this. Down here at the bottom, there's a window called Error List, and if it's not there, you can go to View and then find Error List right here. And there's a drop down here that says Build plus IntelliSense. It might say that for you. If it does, you want to switch it to Build Only. This will speed things up tremendously. So the first thing we want to do is open up this runeretriever.build.cs file. If you just click it, it'll open. And we want to add some entries right before these entries here. And we want to add gameplay abilities, in quotations, gameplay tags, and gameplay tasks right before core. And when that has been added, hit Save All. And then we can move over to the attribute set header file, which is right here. Up at the top, under attribute set.h, we want to add another include that's going to be ability system component.h. And then we're going to highlight the green marks here, and we're going to delete them because we want to add this attribute accessors section. And what this does is just helps us access these things later for ease of use. So just kind of copy this and put that into this section right above U class. Next, under generated body, we're just going to say public and add a public section here with a colon. And then we're going to select urune attribute set, copy that, and paste it here with parentheses at the end. And that's just going to be our constructor. And then after a few seconds, it should have a green squiggle. Right click, go to quick actions and refactorings, and we're going to create a definition in the CPP file. And when this little window pops up, you can close it and save it. So if we wanted to look at that, we could open up the rune attribute set CPP file, and you'll see that we added this little constructor in here. So head back over to the header file. We'll add some more things in here. So we want to add an override, and this is going to be a function that is actually in the attribute set, and we're going to override it so that we can add our own stuff into it. So that is going to be virtual void get lifetime replicated props with parentheses, and then you could say const override and add a semicolon. And then in these parentheses, we want to add a T array, and then this bracket here, F lifetime property, and then we'll close that bracket, and then an ampersand, out lifetime props. So this is just a T array, or a group of lifetime properties, and we're calling it out lifetime props, and it is an override of a function that is on attribute set. And then you'll see that green squiggle line again. You can right click, do the same thing. We're creating a definition in the CPP file, and you can close that. So I'll hit this save all, make sure everything's saved, and we can keep moving forward. Now we're going to be adding the stats for each character in our game. And if you remember, in Elden Ring or Dark Souls, they have quite a long list of stats like vigor, stamina, mana, health, things like that. So we're going to add all of those stats in here. So we'll add one, and then you just kind of redo it for each of the other stats, and I'll show you here. So first we want to say U property, all caps, and then a parentheses, and then inside this we'll do blueprint read only. So init caps for blueprint and read and only. And then we'll do category equals, and we'll add some quotation marks, and inside the quotation marks we'll say this is of the category attributes. And then for the next line, this is the actual variable, and it's going to be of the type F gameplay attribute data. That's the name of the type of variable. And then we'll call it health with a semicolon. You'll see that it turns green, and then there's a red squiggle, and then that goes away. And this would take way longer if it was build plus IntelliSense. So right after that line, we want to do attribute accessors all cap. Attribute accessors, and then parentheses again with a semicolon after, but inside the parentheses we want to say U rune attribute sets, which is the exact same name as this file. And then we'll do a comma and say health. We're passing in the health and the attribute set. And you can see that actually up here. The attribute accessors, we have class name, property name. Well, the class is rune attribute set, and the property name is health. So now we can access this using these accessors. Now we want to do one more thing for this variable here. We want to add a U function, as long as we spell it right, with parentheses, nothing in these parentheses, and then under this we want to do a virtual void on rep underscore health parentheses again with a semicolon, and inside the parentheses, we're going to say const f gameplay attribute data, which is the same as this right here, and then add an ampersand, and then old health. And that way we can keep track of what the old health is and the new health. So if you were to remove that little tab there, right click this on rep health because of that green squiggle, and create a definition in the CPP file, we now have implemented the first stat, which is all of this section, and that is health. So we want to do this for each of the other stats. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that real quick, and I'll show you the list of the types that I use, and then you can kind of just pause the video and type this out. All right, so I've added in all the other stats, and the stats that I added were mana, stamina, vigor, mind, endurance, strength, dexterity, intelligence, faith, and luck. And then I made sure that I implemented these in the CPP file. So now we have a bunch of blank functions over here. So the first thing I want to do up here in the get lifetime replicated props is I want to add a line for each of our stats. And what we're adding is do rep lifetime, and we want to have that all caps, underscore condition underscore notify. And then we want some parentheses, and inside the parentheses we're going to add rune attribute set, and that's actually in the parentheses, and then a comma, health, comma, condition, none, rep notify, underscore, always. And in order to use this, which is for multiplayer or networking, we want to add up here, include net Unreal Network.h. And you can see the red line, squiggle line went away. And so again, we're going to do this for each of our stats. So go ahead and duplicate this several times and replace the stat with each of our stats. So with that done, then we need to add one line in each of these. And the line is as follows: gameplay attribute underscore rep notify, parentheses, and in the parentheses, rune attribute set, comma, and then the stat, and then the old stat. So it's taking in the old stat here, and it's reading the stat we want to associate with this old stat. So we can copy and paste in each of these and replace with the appropriate stat. So go ahead and do that for each. So that should be everything we need to do in the attribute set. And if you want to kind of get more information about what we're doing, there should be a video in the description, which I used to kind of follow along and implement the ability system using what they said. So all I'm doing is I'm kind of following another tutorial, and that guy probably knows a little bit more about this than I do. So if you're really curious about what's going on in here, go ahead and give that video a watch, and he kind of goes over a little bit more in depth than this. So now that we have the attribute set working and in the game, we want to implement it on our characters. So over here you'll see a character header and a character CPP file. Let's open those up and mess around in here. So in the Rune Retriever character header file, we're just going to add a few things in here. The first thing we want to add is a few of these includes up here. So underneath the game framework /character.h, we're just going to add 3. So we have a gameplay tag container.header file. We have a gameplay effect types header file, but this one has brackets instead of quotation marks. And then ability system interface.h. Then, right after public a character, we'll do a comma and then public I ability system interface. And that just implements the interface for the ability system. So under camera, we're just going to add 2 new variables. Go ahead and select the entire camera variable, including the U property line, and then paste it underneath. And what we want to do is just change this stuff a little bit. So category equals camera, that's not what we want. We want abilities. And then instead of a U camera component, we'll do U ability system component, and we'll call it ability system component. And this just is something that we're adding to all characters of the type Rune Retriever character. So we'll inherit enemies from this, we'll inherit the player from this. So we will actually want to remove the camera too, but we'll do that in a bit. So underneath the ability system component, we just want to add another U property, but this one won't have anything in the parentheses. And then underneath here, we'll just say class U Rune attribute set, and then an asterisk, and we'll call it attributes. Now, when you add this Rune attribute set, it may not actually know what you're talking about, so you'll probably have to add an include up here. And all you're typing in is the Rune attribute set.h. And then you can save, and if you right click up here and hit build, then you'll see if it returns an error or not, and it should build successfully. So if we go down here in the public section, we have our constructor, and then we have this U property for turn rate gamepad, but we don't need to mess with that. What we want to do is add right under the constructor, we're going to override a function, which is U ability system component with an asterisk called get ability system component. And then in the parentheses here, there's nothing, but after this is a const override. And this is overridden from the ability in system interface. And then you'll see that green squiggle, so we can go ahead and create a definition. Next, we can add down here in this public section a few max variables, I guess, some integers that tell us what the max will be for the character. And if we just type U property, in the parentheses you can put edit anywhere, blueprint read write, and then category attributes. And then for this one, I'm doing an integer called max health, and I'm setting it to 100. We can duplicate this 3 more times. And this stuff may change also. For the next one, we'll just say max mana. We'll keep that at 100. And then we'll say max stamina. We'll keep that at 100. And then for this last one, we'll say max stat. And we'll just say that that's 99. And that is just going to work for every stat that we have that's not these. So it's like the luck, vigor, things like that. And those will be maxed out at 99, but we can always change this. And then the stamina, mana, and health, those are going to be bars visible on the screen. And we'll just, for now, again, say that they're 100. Those can change later. Next, we have this protected section. We can go down to the second public section, and this just has a couple of these class function things here. And underneath, we'll just add a couple of our own. Now, the first one is going to be a U property. And then we're going to have those parentheses. And then in here, we'll just say blueprint read only, edit defaults only, category is equal to, and then we'll just say abilities again. And then under that, we want to do a T subclass of, and then we want these brackets here. And we'll say this is of the type class U gameplay effect. And we'll call this default attribute effect. So what this is a gameplay effect variable. And it's when it says a T subclass of, that means it can be any type as long as it inherits from or is a gameplay effect. And we're just calling it default attribute effect. So when we assign this in the editor, we can set the default stats like health, mana, stamina, and any of the other stats that we have to anything we want. And this will just be the setup. So we can actually change that for any enemy, any sort of player, or anything like that, just by assigning this in the editor. Now we want to do another one, another variable, and this is going to be an array of abilities that we assign the character from the beginning. So then they'll always have access to these abilities, and these will be things like basic attack, jump, roll, block, things like that. So we want to type U property, and then the parentheses. Basically, it's the same, so we can just copy this, paste it there, and then do a T array, and then a T subclass of, and then another bracket, and this will be class U gameplay ability, and then this will be called default abilities. So now, just above the U properties, we're going to add 4 functions. The first one is a virtual void possessed by, and in the parentheses here is a controller asterisk new controller, and that's an override. The next one is on rep underscore player state, also an override. And then we're doing initialize attributes and give default abilities. Now we want to also create definitions on the CPP file for each of these. And so now we are done with the header file, and we can move over to the CPP file. So over in the CPP file, I want to add a couple includes up here just to be safe. Underneath the controller, I'm going to do an include for ability system component .h. And then I also want to add rune attribute set.header file too. And then in the constructor right here, should be called a rune retriever character if that's the name of your project. Down at the bottom, right after the follow camera, we're going to add a few lines here where we can actually initialize the ability system component. So we just type out ability system component, which is the variable that we made in the header, which is right here. It's this we're just getting. And we want to say it's equal to, so we're assigning this variable to create default sub object. And in the brackets here, the type of object that we're creating is a U ability system component. And then after this, we do parentheses. And in the parentheses, we just add quotation marks and we call it whatever we want to call it. So it will appear on the player or on the character as whatever we type in here. So we'll just say ability system comp. So now it creates the ability system component on the character. Next, we want to say ability system component. And then we'll do a little arrow. And we're looking for set is replicated. And we're setting that to true. Lastly, ability system component, and it should fill it out here. And another arrow, and we're going to set replication mode, which you can see right here, and then parentheses, and the one we're setting it to is minimal, but you have to type in the enumeration, so E game play effect replication mode, and then the two colons here to say which one, which selection, and we're looking for minimal. Now that that is done, we want to create the attributes. So all we have to do is type attributes is equal to create another create default subobject, and we can actually just kind of copy this if you don't want to type it all out. And then instead of ability system component, we're doing rune attribute set, and then we're calling that attributes. Oh, we don't want that down with the / there. All right, so we're done now with the constructor section. So if you scroll down now and you see this ability system component function, it returns a null pointer, but we don't want to return that. We want to return the ability system component. Once that's done, if you scroll down, try to find the functions that you made before in the header file here, and it's these four right here. I'm going to cut them, and then I'm going to move them above the input section. So it kind of separates it because we're going to be removing all this stuff later, and I don't want to be confused. So we'll just go down the list and add the information in each of these functions. The first one, we're doing super possessed by, and we're passing in a new controller. And all this is doing is running the original function as intended, because this is an override. So we want to make sure that everything's being run normally, and then additionally the stuff we want to add. So first we'll just check if the ability system component exists. So if you just say if ability system component, it'll check. Then we'll say ability system components, and then an arrow, init ability actor info. And then we're passing in this, comma, this. After this section here, we just want to initialize attributes. We'll just run the function that we created, so it's right here. And then we're going to give default abilities, running the other function we created. And we'll fill those out here in a second. Next, on rep player state, again, since it's another override, if you check over here, you'll see that we have these two as overrides. Since it's an override, we want to run the super on rep underscore player state and parentheses and semicolon. Again, we want to do this, so copy this, paste it here, and then all we're doing is initializing the attributes. Now we are in the initialize attributes section, and what we're doing in this is a few things here. You might need to pause to copy this, but the first thing we're doing is checking if the ability system component is there and we have a default attribute effect, because what this will do is apply this effect if it exists. Then we're doing an F gameplay effect context handle that we're calling effect context. We're saying it's equal to the ability system component make effect context. We have this arrow again in between the two. And then we have the effect context that we just made. We do dot add source object, and we're adding this. And then we have an F gameplay effect spec handle called a spec handle, and it's equal to the ability system component make outgoing spec, and we're passing in default attribute effect 1 for the level and the effect context we made earlier. Then we check if the spec handle is valid. And if it is, we're creating an F-active gameplay effect handle called GE handle. And we're saying it's equal to ability system component, apply gameplay effect to self, spec handle with an asterisk before it, .data.get parentheses. Now in the give default abilities, we're just going to throw in these 3 lines. First, we're checking if it has authority, if the server has authority, and the ability system component exists. Then we say for, we're doing a for loop through the array of gameplay abilities, and we're calling them startup ability. Each one of these is called startup ability, and this is the array we're going through. So we're going through default abilities, then we're saying the ability system component, give ability, and then passing in the F gameplay ability spec, and then inside that, the startup ability. So it's going through each of these abilities, getting the default subobject with parentheses, and then a 1 and a 0. And that is all we need to do. And I know it's confusing, a bunch of random words and stuff. You don't really need to understand what it does. If, again, check the video in the description and he'll kind of go over it a little more. You can also look it up on the Unreal documentation. So with that done, let's go ahead and make sure everything's saved, hit the local Windows debugger, and see if it opens. All right, so after removing Visual Studio 2022 and reinstalling 2019, and then rebuilding my Visual Studio project files, it has now worked. So hopefully we're using 2019 the entire time. If we hit play, we can see nothing's changed. The character's still doing what they're doing. So we can actually go to the blueprints and, well, actually we want to go to the third person blueprint, third person character, and see if the ability system is on the character. And you can see the ability system right here. We have the component added, which is exactly what we're looking for. We have over here in the class defaults, you can see the default attribute effect dropdown, which is perfect. We have the default abilities array, which will be applied when the game starts. Everything's working very well. Now we have obviously the camera boom and follow camera, which is good for the third person character, but since it inherits from Rune Retriever character, that's where it's coming from. But if we make an enemy, we don't want the camera boom and follow camera on them, nor do we want the input system. So in the next video, I think we're going to implement the new input system and then remove the camera and input functions from the Rune Retriever character C++ files. So that's going to do it for this video. A little longer than I wanted it to be, but this was inevitable. We had to get through this in order to actually get the abilities on the character and get moving with our project. So if you liked the video, please hit like, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.